morning. I'm Angie Cronenberg. I'm the Chief Advocate and General Counsel at INCOMPAS, and I'm really pleased to see so many people in the room to learn more about the broadband opportunities, the broadband boom. So let me just take a moment to introduce, I see we're all up there, so introduce who we have with us right now. we did a slightly different order, so let me just get my bearings. Mark Colwell, he's Senior Manager of Broadband Programs here at the Colorado Broadband Office. Then from NTIA, we have Sarah Smith. She's Broadband Program Specialist for Colorado and Wyoming. And then next to her is Jade Piros de Cavallo, thank you. She's Director of Broadband Development at the state of Kansas. And then last but not least, we have Joshua Breitbart. He's Senior Vice President, Connect All Empire State Development, so that's the state of New York. I'm really pleased to see so many of you coming. And again, I just did a panel with women. We had a lot of great geographic diversity, so I'm really happy that we also have all the way from the East Coast to the Midwest and here in Colorado, so thank you for joining us. I know you all want to learn more about what is going on with the process and the timing, and I thought we'd first start with Sarah to talk a little bit about the role that NTIA is playing with the states, and then have each state representative talk about what's happening at your state in terms of process. And then Sarah was going to discuss a little bit on timing as well immediately after that.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So again, my name's Sarah Smith. I'm the Federal Program Officer, or the Broadband Specialist for the state of Colorado and for Wyoming. And our role is sort of to be that inside man in the NTIA for stakeholders, for states, as well as any potential subgrantees. So we offer technical assistance, we offer policy support, we offer all types of guidance, and we also send people like me out to stakeholders to educate. So we have kind of a diverse role. It depends on each FPO. Each state has an FPO. And we each see our role as being the supporters of this money being deployed and reaching all of Americans.
That's great. So what is an FPO, Sarah?
Yeah. So we're the subject matter experts on the funding that's coming out of the NTIA. From the Broadband Infrastructure Law, there was 4 programs that were funded to the NTIA, and the FPOs manage 2 of them. There's 2 other programs that are managed by separate teams. But basically, we are responsible for ensuring that all of the rules and regulations are followed with the funding, that the funding gets deployed, and that it gets deployed correctly.
Great, thank you.
Do you want me to go through the slides now, or you want to do this?
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about the timing, and then we'll talk with our state representatives about the roles that they're playing at the state and local level.
Okay, great. If you want to just do the next slide for me. Oh, the one after that. Thank you. So this is the basics of the BEAD, Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment. It's every state gets a direct-to-state allocation of funding, and the point that we're in right now is right before the 2023 dot. So all of the states have turned in their letter of intent, and all of the states have turned in their application that releases up to $5 million for planning. So for those of you who are providers or builders, this is a good opportunity to get involved with states now, find out who your broadband office is, and provide your expertise as network developers, okay? They're planning, they're putting together a needs assessment of what broadband is gonna look like in their state for the next 5 years, which is the full implementation window for BEAD. So we're waiting for states to receive their full planning grant dollars, and then we're also waiting for the FCC to complete their processes with the broadband data collection that ended September 30th. So for those of you who are providers, you sent in data. They've released the Fabric Bulk Challenge, which is the first map, which shows the broadband serviceable locations. And then the second map, which they have told us will be out in November, will show broadband coverage. And on that day that the maps are made available, or anytime after that, the Assistant Secretary, Alan Davidson, can make an allocation of funding to the states based on unserved, underserved, community anchor institutions without gigabit service and high cost areas, which are defined by the NTIA. And I just want to say there's a lot of information out there about how much money each state is going to get. Nobody knows that yet, not even the NTIA. It's entirely based on these maps, which aren't fully completed. There's an opportunity for the Assistant Secretary to wait for the first round of challenge process to the broadband serviceable locations and the broadband coverage maps before they make an allocation. So I wouldn't expect it to come in November, but it might. So that's the basics of that. Once the maps are released, once the allocation of funding is released, then the state needs to put together an initial proposal. They have 180 days from receipt of funding to put together an initial proposal, and directly after that, they have to open a separate challenge process. The state has to open a challenge process where they release their initial proposal for comment. It has to be a transparent process, but the state gets a lot of leeway in how they define this challenge process. So again, if you're a provider, if you're a builder, this is a good opportunity to get cozy with your broadband office, because you can provide them support as subject matter experts. So that's the basics of BEAD. We can go on to DE really quickly and then,
sure.
Yeah, so if you'll just do the next slide. Okay, so this is the Digital Equity Act. There's 3 programs. 2 of them are for states only. 1 of them is competitive. The state program was a notice of funding opportunity that was released in May. It was formula-based direct to state allocation, so each state knew how much money they were going to get in the NOFO. Colorado got just under $1 million for planning efforts. So for Colorado, our digital equity office is the Office of Future of Work, and they work very closely with the Broadband office. And they've turned in their letter of intent, and they've turned in their planning app, and they are waiting for funding to be released, and they have a year to put together a plan. So if you're interested in digital equity, if you want to look at creating a workforce development program that trains the next round of broadband implementers, if you're looking to add a devices program to your services to access more customers, this is the program for you. So you want to get cozy, again, with your digital equity office or your point of contact for this funding and support them in understanding the internet service providers' needs for digital equity and inclusion, okay? So that's the state planning grant. After the 1-year plan is created by each office, a state capacity grant will be open. There'll be a second notice of funding opportunity, and there'll be a second formula funding direct allocation to that organization. We don't know how much that's going to be yet, but stay tuned. It's meant to implement the plan that was just created. They have 5 years to implement their plan. So they get the state gets roughly 6 years to implement digital equity and inclusion. At the 4-year mark, so 2 years from now, the competitive grant opens. Now you might want to apply for the competitive grant if you've applied for the state program and didn't win, if you have a very broad program that you want to implement across the entire state, or if you didn't know at the time what you needed for digital equity and it took you a couple of years out there building with some of the BEAD money to understand what your issues were going to be around digital equity. So that's the basics. All of the programs end in 2026, 2027. The last 2 programs are tribal connectivity and middle mile. Tribal connectivity has its separate team. They fund directly to the federally recognized tribal organizations in states. And the middle mile program is a competitive program for $1 billion. The grant process closed on the 30th of September, and they're hoping to release funds around March of next year.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful.
It's a lot of information.
It is a lot of information. And I know that NTIA has been pushing out a lot of information with webinars and making these slides available. So I would recommend for those of you who have follow-up questions, to really check NTIA's resources on their website. And if you are a member of NCOMPAS, you've been getting great information from Andrew Minchef, who's going to moderate the next panel talking to our industry members about the process too. So we'll hear from their perspective as companies and hopefully learn a little bit more how they can get cozy with all the offices and do a really great job of helping you. Okay, so let's turn to the states, and I know you all have been really busy. I mean, it's not like you're waiting around. Yes, we're waiting for the maps to be completed, and we're waiting for the calculations to happen, right? But there's a lot of work happening right now at the state. So let's start with Joshua, and if you could describe what's going on in your office, and then we'll have Jade, and then lastly we'll have Mark talk. So thank you, Joshua.
Sure, and thank you to NCOMPAS for organizing this event and allowing us to come join you today, and to Angie for moderating. So I became the head of the New York Broadband office just at the beginning of September. You know, like many of you, just sort of jumping on a moving train here, and the immediate focus is just building office capacity. And this is still true at NTIA, and it's true, I think, for every state broadband office. We are adding staff, adding capacity, securing our consultant partnerships. It's really critical. You know, when somebody gives you the assignment to chop down a really big tree, the first thing you have to do is sharpen your axe. And that's really the immediate focus. Now, everything from the NTIA standpoint is continuing on, and so we're also, you know, meeting all our application deadlines and preparing to implement right away as soon as those planning grants are released.
Jade, in Kansas, what's going on?
Well, again, I'd like to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Reiterate my gratitude for the invitation. This has been a fabulous conference. I've learned a lot. So thank you, Angie, for the invitation. So I was appointed to be the Director of Broadband Development in Kansas in June, which makes me a veteran. So I was going to say I've only been here 4.5 months, but similarly, I've hit the ground running. We too are building capacity. We're going from a staff of 2 to 11 in short order. So that has taken some time. But my primary focus, unrelated to the NTIA opportunities, was to usher Kansas's Capital Projects Fund for Infrastructure program plan through Treasury. So I really wanted to get that approved quickly because many states have allocated hundreds of millions of dollars in their ARPA state fiscal recovery funds to broadband. Kansas is not one of those states. So I thought it was important to position us in a way that we could get some broadband dollars out there quickly because we know that those supply, equipment, and labor constraints are really going to affect every state. So we were approved for that plan in July and opened up a very aggressive 4-week application window immediately after that. And we'll be announcing awards this month, November and December. So that's $83.5 million infrastructure plan that was 700% oversubscribed. Providers really stepped up in Kansas and applied for almost $600 million. So we have been working overtime to evaluate those applications. Again, the staffing has been a focus. I came on after the NOFA was released for BEAD and digital equity, so really had to spin up those applications for the planning grants. One was due 3 weeks after I started. Next one was due a month after that, and then Kansas did also apply for the middle mile competitive opportunity. So that's kind of what we've been up to in the last 4.5 months, and would love to hear from any of you after the panel if you'd like more information about what we're doing. Thank you.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, so thanks again for the invitation, and thanks for picking Colorado. We're glad you're here, and we hope you come back again, and hopefully it's been a good experience. I joined the Colorado Broadband office in July, and we've been pretty busy since about February. Our executive director, Brandy Ryder, was hired then, and Governor Polis signed an executive order stating the goal of connecting 99% of Colorado households by the end of 2027. And so we've spent the last 5 or 6 months developing our Colorado Broadband Roadmap. It's actually available for public comment now. We welcome anyone who wants to make a comment and help us out with that. But that's really been our guiding principles document to help implement some of our programs. So there are about 16 states, Kansas being one of them, who've received their capital projects funds notification from Treasury. We're in queue right now. We're going to receive $162 million to run our grant program. And we're hoping to open that relatively soon. We've got to develop the guidelines, put it out for comment and so forth, and open up our window. In addition, we've been filling out our broadband, our NTIA broadband plan as well, our $5 million, up to $5 million award to help plan our BEAD program. That's one of the challenges I think in this process is I've seen estimates of $400 million for Colorado, and I've seen estimates of $800 million. So developing a grant program, not knowing if you're going to have half as much money is a little bit challenging. But and then the other thing, as they've mentioned, is we've been staffing up. We went from, when Brandy was hired in February, we probably had 4 or 5 staff members. We have about 15 people working in the Colorado Broadband office. We've been around since 2016, I believe. Sarah actually worked there at one point. And we've been doing mapping since 2012. So we have a lot of experience in the broadband space. We've also been running 2 grant programs in Colorado. We have a broadband deployment board, which funds last mile projects, and a middle mile program. So we have a lot of experience that we can hopefully apply the good lessons learned to our applications. But that's what we've been up to.
Talk a little bit about what Sarah had mentioned, and that is how industry can help play a role in what it is that you're doing at these planning stages, beyond helping suggest good employees to fill out your offices. What other steps could providers be taking in helping you in your roles?
I can dive right in, yeah. So, I think a couple of the big challenges we have, one of them is broadband readiness, just making sure a lot of the places that don't have broadband today, they don't have a lot of capacity. And I think where industry can help is helping us develop, broadband readiness checklist, a program that we can give to smaller communities, or hopefully, counties and regions, because a lot of the towns that aren't served today, they don't have the, project manager, the engineering expert, the mapping person, but they can work with the communities around them. And some of the most successful projects in Colorado have followed that model. But where industry can help is help us figure out what we can get towns working on now to make it really easy for providers to come in later, because they just don't know what they don't know at this point.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would also say that in Kansas, we're a much newer office. We were established at the end of 2020, and so we don't have a lot of the same kind of tools Colorado has, and Virginia and some of these other states that have been at it for a decade. And one of our biggest disadvantages is a lack of statewide mapping. And so while many states open up programs with broadband availability, or like kind of availability areas that people can choose to bid on, we really rely heavily on providers to help identify the areas of need, and then we look at NBAM and Form 477 data and also surveys and speed tests to try to establish where are those areas that aren't currently covered. So we really need the capacity of our providers and those strong partnerships. I also look to providers for feedback on our program plans. We don't do program plans by committee, but definitely want to know that if what we're spinning up isn't going to properly incent you to go out into these high-cost, unserved areas, then I want to know, because we want our programs to be successful. And I always say, we're not building an inch of fiber. We're not an ISP. We're not regulators. We're just the government, and we're here to help. So we want to help us in our mission of universal connectivity. So always looking for constant feedback, and boy, do I get it. Good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, so obviously, in a similar situation, we do have a mapping effort led by our State Department of Public Service, and certainly contributing to that effort and the FCC fabric process, which I know we're all also focused on as well, is critically important for each state. Forming partnerships is a great time to be doing that. As Sarah said, there are multiple programs, and understanding how those will align is really one of the challenges for the state offices. And Mark, I think you were speaking to this. In the areas where the need is greatest is where those collaborations haven't been present. So starting to build that, finding who your digital equity partners are going to be, finding your local government partners, because we will be taking in New York great lead from local government and understanding what the right approach is. And I say that there's obviously a political aspect to having those partnerships in place, no doubt, and it aligns with the values of the state office to focus on digital equity and those public-private collaborations. But also I think that that's the way that from a business standpoint, we're going to have confidence at the state level that these projects will succeed because you've got the partnerships in place. So beginning to build that is key. And then, and I think, Jade, as you said, helping us identify what's going to make our states attractive for private investment. To a large extent, this is a very collegial group and a collegial field, certainly on the government side. I won't speak for all of you. But we're all also competing for talent in our state offices, for sure, for the attention of the principals of any consultants that we might share, and also for the private investment that you all can mobilize. And that's it's not a zero-sum game by any stretch, but we want to understand how we can be effective partners in driving that economic development opportunity that this represents.
Well, you may have seen the memo that Encompass really believes in competition. So I think it's a good thing to see that there's competition across the board for the talent, for the consultants, and hopefully we're all sharpening each other to make it all better in the end. Encompass has been very involved in the NOFO process at NTIA, and as Chip had mentioned even earlier in the process, in trying to shape the legislation so that we can achieve internet for all here in the US. And we had two main policy focuses, and one of them was to ensure that competitors had an opportunity to participate in these processes. We have many competitors in the room who are doing fantastic jobs, going to areas that have been left behind, whether they don't have any capacity right now for broadband or have very low capacity for broadband, bringing them up to modernized speeds and standards that reflect, where the globe is going, where very high standards have been set around the world. Give us your perspective on how competitors really can help in this process and the opportunities that there are for them.
I guess I'll
Jane,
start.
sure.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your work on competition, because we all recognize that the digital divide wouldn't exist if, a few players hadn't left behind some of our countries. So it is very important. I think that one thing we're doing is the local consult piece is such a big part and baked into our grant decision-making process. And so we're really encouraging and incenting providers who work directly with the communities they want to serve to go into those areas, talk to the people, get letters of support, create the plans together with the community instead of just swoop in from outside to gather up grant money. I mean, we know that when I was on the private side, for a CLEC, a fiber CLEC overbuilder for 7 years, and we witnessed time and time again, competition is going to drive down prices. It's going to increase service speeds and increase customer service. And so while we're not going to allow for overbuilding, we don't have the luxury of that. Our allocation isn't going to be big enough to bring, multiple providers to every region. We are definitely trying to encourage, with the way we write our programs, for instance, our capital projects fund for infrastructure was a sliding scale. We're trying to encourage new entrants into markets that have been ignored or are only being served by satellite or DSL. I don't know if that's helpful.
Joshua?
Yeah, we are maybe in one of the distinctions for New York is we're coming off of a broadband investment program, which has given us a lot of great understanding, partners in the private sector that have some momentum. So that's given us a lot that we can build on. It also helped set up the state legislature to address some issues that had come up regarding I would say, middle mile access, fees that the state was charging. The Department of Public Service, some of you may have just participated in a proceeding gathering information about one-touch make-ready processes. So that work is really underway. And I think, as I said about middle mile, that's another area where I think the state can be strategic. Certainly, we didn't apply directly for middle mile, We're looking forward to those investments coming from NTIA, and we're looking at making some of those investments potentially ourselves because of the potential that has to unlock deployment into more areas of the state. For us, one of the things that the state legislature did was authorize the New York Power Authority, which is a government entity, to utilize its fiber capacity. For competitive entrants, working in partnership with local governments and others, that creates some opportunities to be in parts of the state that may not have been feasible before. And then we're looking at what other needs, whether it's investments in fiber that unlock multiple opportunities, multiple providers, multiple technologies, or of course just getting into making sure that the areas that are unserved, trying to understand which are onesies, twosies, and which are real market opportunities, because they may not be huge areas. So helping understand the right market conditions, market sizing for you all is going to help drive how we analyze and package the opportunities throughout the state.
One thing I did want to add, and I'm curious if you two are doing this, while we're not mandating open access in our grants, we are including it in our scoring matrix. So subgrantees that agree to provide wholesale or open access will be more highly positioned for grant awards. And in our middle mile application, of course, that's going to be open access, we be awarded at every level, duct, dark, and lit. So excited about that opportunity. Sarah, can you put in a good word for Kansas? People in high places.
I'm a peon. I can't help you.
Just a couple more things I think where you all could help us. First of all, workforce is a big issue for every state. And NTIA just put out a workforce guide, I think last week. We love your input on what's working, what programs can we rely upon. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's good things already happening out there. Colorado did a study, we think we'll be probably 3,500 jobs short by 2026, just basic construction all the way to, fiber splicers and so forth. So we've got to fill that gap. And for us, it's hard. We have an unemployment rate of about 3.4%. There just aren't a lot of people out there that want to take on a manual construction job and dynamite through granite and so forth. So we could use your help trying to find good training programs. The other challenge there is a lot of the people that might be willing to work don't live in the places where we need them to build the broadband. So any input you've got on that, we'd welcome it. And we also, a lot of the states are starting to set up kind of regular meetings with industry. We have an industry roundtable. We'd invite all you to participate in that. It happens every other month. First one was in September. We've got another one coming up in November. And just an opportunity for us to get feedback from you all and help inform our programs. So we welcome all that.
And Sarah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add something to keep in mind too in terms of competitiveness is that in those areas that are defined as high cost, which everyone's talked about today, the 25% match that is required either by the state or the state can pass it down to subgrantees is not required in the high cost areas. So in any of the areas that the NTIA identifies in the map as high cost are exempt from that 25% match to encourage providers to come to those areas because we know that they're expensive. They're not served for a reason now. So it also relieves the state from having to require that of their partners because we want to encourage as many people to come into those places as possible.
And that'll be, the high cost areas will be determined by NTIA once the FCC maps are completed. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that I have the order correctly. Yep. I want to thank you for your comments about the competition, but also the speed to market and the work that New York is doing to ensure that we have fast processes at the state and the local level, because this is really hard work. And we can talk about deployment, but there are people every day that are attaching to poles and getting access to the conduit. And so that's the second area that NCOMPAS has really been focused on with our members is how we can work with the local communities so that we can give them, the toolkits that they need to know, like this is typically how other cities are working these issues to ensure their speed to market for broadband, because we know that there's significant need. Well, so I had a lot of questions, but I see we have about 7.5 minutes, And I wanted to provide an opportunity for our audience to ask questions as well. Do we have any audience questions? Don't be shy. Here we go. Ethan. I knew we would have at least one. Ethan, right here in the front, Neelan.
Obviously, being that we have diverse geographic areas, what kind of support are you providing? And there is some sort of competition as far as talent stuff. Obviously, the goal of everyone is the same, to try to get everyone to have broadband. So what kind of support do you give each other as far as implementing programs, especially for Colorado, who's had something since 2016? You've learned the lessons. So if Kansas or New York or something wants to come and figure out what has worked for you, although it's not a universal application, what kind of support can you give, and what kind of support can the other states provide?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, we have a broadband leaders network, and many states talk kind of on a regular basis, and that's really helpful to learn. But there's a couple other ideas out there. I'll give you one. On workforce, we happen to have the Four Corner regions, and we border a couple other states that have maybe more favorable weather other times of the year. We can't build part of the year in Colorado, but they can build. And so there might be a way to share some of our workforce resources as an example. So I think there's ways to work with our kind of our region and figure out where we can share in places that it can benefit both of us.
And I just want to thank the NTIA, because they have really been fostering that leaders network and the opportunities for collaboration. It sometimes is difficult to sort of look away from your own state. I mean, taxpayers, we get to come here, but they really expect us to be nose to the grindstone locally all the time. But to do the job right, you really do have to be learning the lessons from your peers.
Yeah, and there's so many of us who are new in this role, who have been here for less than a year, and without that state broadband leaders network, I think we would all just be swimming upstream with no hope. So I lean heavily on that group, especially those who have been in the role for 2 or 3 or 4 years. They provide everything from job descriptions, copies of their plans, middle mile strategy, statewide strategy. We meet once or twice a month via Zoom, and then there's also a Google group that we're involved with. But people like Beneath in Louisiana, I reach out to him a lot. I used to reach out to Arizona, that's left. Indiana, Jody Golden, she just left. We're dropping like flies, guys. This is a stressful job, but so much fun. So yeah, there's enough receptions to make it fun, right?
Yeah, it's also that if you are coming to the state office with a policy proposal or a program, it's really helpful to identify other states that are taking that same approach, because we'll check with them on how it's going and how it's applicable to their context and whether that's useful to us. So when you come forward to the state offices, include that context, I would say.
So at Encompass, while we have been working really diligently throughout all of these processes, and we have faced, some headwinds, frankly, what are the headwinds that you see coming that you're trying to prepare for, and how can we all help with those headwinds?
Well, I think we already touched on workforce. That's certainly a big part of it, and I think it also is a big opportunity, because we can really expand who's participating, both in terms of contracting and employment and ownership. So that's one of the opportunities, the challenges that can become opportunities. Supply chain, I think, is another one, particularly as we try and plan multiple years ahead. And one where industry is going to, that's one of the topics I think today, but one where industry is going to, I think, be critical to giving us some guidance of what that will look like.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We heard the OpEx, CapEx panel yesterday, how concerning those supply and equipment and labor constraints are. I'm not sure what Encompass can do to help with that, but there are a couple of areas that are particular to Kansas that I think are a little concerning. One is the high cost allocation. It's only 10% of the formula for BEAD in Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska. Those are states with a lot of rurality, and so we're poised to maybe not get the allocation we need to connect every person in that state, whereas other states may get double what they need and can do lots of innovative programs. So if you can just get Congress to change that, Angie, that would be awesome. I know you are very persuasive. So that is one area we see concern with. The other one is we anticipate a little bit of pushback on the federal guidelines on speeds from certain industry partners. We haven't yet had any formal effort at the state to, approach our legislature and see if we could, pass something that would supersede, which you can't do, but it could happen. So any support on just reiterating the importance of creating networks that are as future-proof as possible and are just built in a way that is going to support those bandwidth needs into the future.
We highly recommend just using that video. Send that cartoon.
It's a great video.
Jeff put that video together, and it was right around the time of the Olympics. But it does make, I think, a very good point about what our peers are doing around the world. And that is what Congress was really chasing, because we were persuasive and we did convince them you need to be setting very high goals. We're continuing to work with the FCC on this issue too, because they also set a standard for broadband and they're looking at increasing the speed, and we're pushing them to increase it even higher and working with all of the folks in this room because that's what they're delivering and consumers are purchasing it, right? There's a lot of pent up demand because there's so many needs in the homes now for broadband capacity. All right, so we have just less than a minute. Any final words?
Well, I would just say that one of the things that the NTIA is keeping a very close watch on is NEPA and permitting. So, there will be categorical exclusions that the NTIA is working on with NEPA that have to do with the environmental process. But there's a really key piece in the BEAD NOFO, which is climate resiliency and NEPA. So we're anticipating a lot of pushback around that because the NEPA process can be very difficult. But if you can think about it now, if you can think about researching the projects that you want to build to avoid some of those traditional pitfalls of wildlife, and that will help the NTIA help all of you get your money faster.
Mark?
I don't know that I have much to add, but I think we're thinking about environmental, workforce, supply chain, all those things. And the best way that you all can help is just talk to us. We've got a lot of brand new people with some with a lot of experience, some with not so much. So the more you can talk to us, that helps. And also, as Josh mentioned, if there's a state doing something good, please tell us. If there's a state doing something not so good, please tell us so that we're aware.
Right, Joshua?
Yeah, and I would say be vocal, and not just to us. So, we might be the ones on the stage probably because we're leading in promoting competition and creating those opportunities for you to enter and expand in our states. So don't just come and talk to us, because you might be preaching to the choir in some cases. Make sure you are educating legislators and other stakeholders in our states, because you can be sure that incumbent operators are doing that. So make sure your voices are heard in those conversations as well, so that we can take a balanced and thoughtful approach on how to best meet the needs of our respective states.
Thank you. Jade, you want to have the last word?
I would just say, queue up your projects. Have your projects ready so that when the states, they open up these programs, we can just hit the ground running and get people connected as quickly as possible. You are the people connecting others, and we're so grateful for the partnerships. Reiterate, just reach out to us. We want your feedback and would be happy to connect with any of you, whether you're in Kansas or other states. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time, because I know several of you had to travel a long way. Several of you did not, but we do thank each of you for spending time. I hope you can spend the day with us. I'm sure there are many people in the room who'd like to connect with you. We appreciate you offering your thoughts and your advice, and thank you for the hard work. You may be dropping like flies, but we're going to try to lift you all up so that you all stay in your jobs and do what we can to help you.
Thank you.